The night sky stretched wide and endless, filled with stars that looked like scattered fire across the dark velvet. The land below was silent except for the rustle of grass swaying in the cool wind and the distant call of night birds. A lonely figure sat by a small fire, her eyes fixed on the flames as though they carried answers to questions she had never dared to ask aloud. She was an outcast, shunned by her own people, treated like a shadow no one wanted to see. Yet inside her burned a fire no exile could ever put out. She longed not only for survival but for belonging, for love, for a place where her heart could rest without fear of rejection. Her story was not one of easy paths or gentle voices. She had known ridicule, the harsh whispers of those who called her cursed, the cold shoulders that refused her warmth. But in the silence of her lonely nights, she told herself that somewhere out there was someone who could see her for what she truly was. Not a burden, not a mistake, but a soul worth cherishing. It was this hope that kept her alive, this fragile dream that refused to die no matter how many wounds life gave her. Across the plains, beyond the reach of the campfires she once knew, rode a Comanche warrior. His spirit was untamed, his heart bound to the rhythms of the earth, the sky, and the call of his people. He was strong, feared by enemies, respected among his tribe. Yet behind the fierce eyes and the hardened will was a man who carried his own battles, his own scars that no one else could see. Honor bound him, duty shaped him, but something deep within his soul longed for more than endless conflict and the weight of tradition pressing on his shoulders. The night their paths crossed was one neither would ever forget. She had wandered, farther than she should have, her bare feet carrying her through tall grass where shadows danced with the firelight of the moon. Fear gripped her, but so did a strange pull, as though fate itself was guiding her steps. And then, in the silence of the plains, she saw him. His horse stood tall and restless, his hand resting steady on his weapon, his eyes locking on hers with a sharpness that made her breath catch. Two worlds collided in that instant. An outcast girl who had nothing to lose, and a warrior who had everything to protect. She should have turned away. He should have let her pass. Yet something unspoken held them both still. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth and smoke, and in her trembling voice she spoke words that would change everything. "Be the first man in my bed," she whispered, her voice breaking yet steady in its truth. "And the only one I will love." Her eyes did not falter, even as fear surged through her chest. She was not speaking of lust, not of fleeting desire, but of trust, of surrendering the only piece of herself no one had ever wanted, her heart. The Comanche warrior did not move. His hand tightened on the reins, his jaw set as he studied her with a gaze that burned hotter than the fire she had left behind. The world around them seemed to still, as if the stars themselves leaned closer to witness what would come next. Was she a fool for offering herself this way? Was he a danger greater than any she had ever faced? Or had fate drawn them together, for reasons neither of them could yet understand? The girl's words hung heavy in the night air, fragile yet powerful, daring yet desperate. Her chest rose and fell as she waited, not knowing whether his next step would bring her closer to love or shatter what little hope she had left. And in that moment, on that quiet plain under the endless sky, the story of an outcast and a warrior began, not in comfort, but in the sharp edge of uncertainty, where everything could be lost, or everything finally found. And as his dark eyes stayed fixed on hers, unreadable and steady, the question that burned between them was one no silence could answer. Would he accept what she offered, or would the night swallow her words and leave her alone once again? He did not answer her right away. The Comanche warrior watched the outcast girl the way a hunter studies a strange track in the dust, alert to everything around it. The horse shifted under him and snorted. A cloud passed over the moon, and the tall grass turned silver-gray, like water rippling in a quiet river. The girl felt the wind brush her cheeks and realized how cold the night had grown. Still, she stood her ground, clutching the edge of her worn shawl, waiting for a word that would tell her if she had made a terrible mistake. "Why?" he asked at last. His voice was low, more of a breath than a sound. She almost laughed because the answer seemed too big for one word. Why? Because the days behind her had been hard, and the days ahead looked empty. Because she was tired of eating alone, of sleeping with fear for company, because the world felt too wide for one heart unless someone else held the other end of its weight. But she did not say any of that. She said the simplest truth she knew. "I want a life that is mine," she said, "and I want to give it where it will be safe." He studied her like someone reading signs on the horizon. His people were not careless with promises. A Comanche warrior lived by honor, by the law of the camp and the law of the land. Take what is needed. Protect what is yours. Keep your word. He thought of his mother's quiet face, of his uncle's stern lessons, of the old men's voices, in council speaking of raids and horses and borders drawn by other hands. He also thought of the last time he had trusted a stranger and what it had cost. "You speak in the open," he said. "Do you know the meaning of the words you give?" Her eyes did not drop. "Yes." He dismounted but kept the reins in hand. He did not come too close. The fire from her camp was a soft glow behind her shoulder, a little pool of light that made the rest of the prairie look endless. He walked a half circle, watching the ground, the sky, the ridges. He listened to the night the way his teachers had shown him. Hear what is near, feel what is far. Nothing moved but grass. Nothing cried but an owl. When he looked back at her, the question in his face had changed. It was no longer whether she meant her words. It was whether fate had meant for him to hear them. "Tell me what drives you from your people," he said. She swallowed and nodded. The story came in pieces at first, like ash drifting from a log not yet burned through. She had been marked by bad luck. A storm had taken the roof of the house where she had grown up, and her stepfather's temper had turned sharp in the months after cutting her whenever she passed. Someone's cattle went missing, and someone else's child fell ill, and someone's jealousy grew bold. People needed a reason to hate, and she had been easy to blame. Outcast girl, bad sign, stay away. When she spoke at the well, women lowered their heads. When she walked in the market, men stepped aside as if the very dust around her could stain them. "It got small," she said softly. "The world. And I could not breathe." He did not ask where her mother was. The way the girls' eyes slid away told him enough. He had known grief too, different shape, same weight. He crouched by the edge of the firelight and scooped a pinch of dirt. He rubbed it between his fingers like he was testing the earth for rain. Silence settled again, heavy as a blanket. Then he said, "You spoke of love as if it were a shelter." She nodded. "I did not mean to shame myself. I meant only to show that I am done with those who pretend to care and then turn their backs. If I give my heart, I will not divide it. If I ask for a place, it will be one place." He turned this over, careful with it. The wind carried the faint smell of water, the river not far off, the way it carries news without words. The Comanche camp lay a day's ride to the south, dust of horses still fresh around it, stories of the hunt waiting to be told, songs ready for the fire. He thought of the face he showed his people, calm, certain, cut like stone. He thought of the face no one saw when he slept, the one that woke at times with a single question he could never answer. Whether he belonged to the path he had chosen, or if the path had chosen him and would never let him go. "There are rules," he said. "There is my duty, there is the way of my people. I know I am an outsider," she said, "but I know how to work. I know how to listen. I can learn the things you ask me to learn. It is better to live honest in a strange place than to live a lie in a place that calls itself home. The horse flicked its ears, restless. He calmed it with a stroke. He could feel how thin the space was between the two of them, as thin as the skin on water before a wind touches it. He could also feel the weight of what would follow if he made the wrong choice. A Comanche warrior bringing an outcast girl into camp would stir questions. It would stir doubt. It could cut trust. Yet turning away a person who had come in truth could also cut something. Something inside him that still believed in a wider kind of honor. "Come to the fire," she said quietly. "I will not touch you. Sit so I can see your hands. We can speak more plainly." He hesitated, then nodded. He tied off the horse, picked a place with care, and sat where the light touched his boots but left his face in half shadow. The girl added a small stick to the flames. Sparks rose and vanished. Her movements were steady, practiced. He could see the calluses on her palm, the threadbare edge of her sleeve, the way she kept her shoulders square even when she was tired. He had seen fear curl people in on themselves. She did not curl. She stood up straight inside her fear. "My mother loved stories," she said. "She used to say the land remembers us if we walk it with respect. When she got sick, people stopped coming by. The healer came twice, then he would only pass a note through the door. After she was gone, I stayed a while, trying to hold on to the house. Then the roof went, and I could not fix it alone. I left before winter would trap me with the ghosts." "What do you hope to find?" he asked. "Not comfort," she said. "Not at first. I hope to find a reason to fight for tomorrow. A reason that does not break me." His eyes softened, almost unguarded. He knew what it meant to need a reason. Some days it was the drumbeat of hooves across open ground. Some days it was the soft weight of a child's laugh near the cooking fire. Some days it was the look in an elder's eye when a promise had been kept. And some days, like tonight, it was a stranger's voice laying down a bright thread across the dark, a thread he could follow if he had the courage. "There are other dangers," he said. "Not only in your old town. Riders are near these days, who do not know this land and do not care to. They take and do not pay. They cut fences where no fences should be and leave iron where grass should wave. We have been watching them. If they see you alone, they might try to use your fear." "I know," she said. "I avoided the main road. I kept to the creeks. I walked for 3 nights. He tilted his head. 3 nights alone on the frontier. Spoke of a certain kind of strength, or stubbornness, maybe both. He had both too. That, more than anything, made him wary. 2 stubborn souls can crash as easily as they can hold each other up." "Why me?" he asked finally. "There are men. In your town, traders along the river, hunters who pass." "Why speak to me this way?" She looked straight at him. "Because you did not look at me like I was a curse." He felt the words settle into him, like a small stone that sinks and touches bottom. He had seen the way some outsiders stared at those who were different, the way they studied with a hunger that had nothing to do with understanding. He had learned to stand tall beneath that gaze. He had also learned to make his own gaze a shield for those who needed it. Perhaps she had seen that, even from a distance. Behind them, the sky deepened to a richer blue. The moon slid higher. Somewhere, a coyote called, lonely and thin. The fire's edge cracked. He listened to the coyote and thought of omens. He thought of the elders' talk of balance, of how the river returns to its banks after a flood, of how a broken branch still feeds the tree with what it learned from the light. "I should take you to the river," he said slowly. "There is a cottonwood there with roots like a hand. It hides a small path. At dawn, you can follow it to a bend where reeds grow. You could rest there and think without being seen." "And you?" she asked. "I have a duty to my people," he said. Tomorrow there is a council. We speak of the riders, of a peace meeting some men from the forts want, of trades along the trail. If I return with you at my side, questions will rise like birds startled from grass. Then take me only to the river, she said. I will not ask more, not now. But come back when the sun sets again. If you do not return, I will know your answer. He watched her silently. It was clever, what she asked. It left him both bound and free. No oath, yet a promise hanging in the air. He could refuse and be clean. He could return and be changed. Either way, the next night would judge him. He stood and the horse lifted its head. He stamped the fire smaller with his heel, careful not to scatter embers into the grass. He nodded once to her and gestured for her to follow at a distance. They moved like two shadows through the night, quiet, deliberate, senses stretched thin. The earth beneath them felt honest. No games, no masks, just dirt and stone and root. That honesty steadied him. When they reached the cottonwood he had named, the river's breath wrapped them in a cooler wind. Water glinted in the moon. He showed her the hidden path with a tilt of his chin. She crouched, tested the soft ground, took in the shelter the roots offered. He could see relief loosen her shoulders a little, the first easing of the night. Thank you, she said. He nodded again, turning to go. He took 3 steps and stopped. Something had changed in the air. A scent, faint but sharp, pulling at memories of iron and smoke. His horse tossed its head, uneasy. The warrior lifted his face to the wind and listened. The coyote had gone quiet. The owl had stopped calling. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. He felt the hair rise on his arms. Stay low, he said. The girl obeyed at once, sliding into the cradle of roots, pulling her shawl over her hair. He stepped into the open, every sense awake, and moved toward a slight rise that gave him a view downriver. He scanned the dark, patient, heartbeat steady. Far off, he thought he saw the briefest blink of a distant ember, not the kind that slips from a log and dies, the kind that rides on the end of a cigarette, the kind that belongs to a camp not meant to be seen. He returned to the cottonwood and knelt. Someone is near, he whispered. Not from my camp, not yours. Her breath hitched. Do we run? If we run, we show our backs, he said. If we stay, we might learn what we need to know. He hesitated, choices narrowing like a canyon. I can lead them away. You hide and wait for dawn. If I do not return, follow the path I showed you and keep to the reeds. Do not step where the ground looks thin. No, she said, fierce without being loud. If you lead them, off, you may not find your way back to me. He held her gaze, and in it he saw more than fear. He saw that thread again, the bright one stretched across the dark between them. He had not tied it, and yet it held. He stood, weight shifting, the horse pawing at the dirt in short, restless arcs. A faint sound drifted toward them then, out of the hush, metal clinking softly, the slow creak of leather, a muffled laugh like someone trying not to be heard and failing. The warrior's jaw tightened. The riders were closer than he'd guessed. He took the girl's hand only long enough to press something small into it. If you must move, he said, go slow. Breathe with the river. Become a reed. Do not be a stone. She nodded, fingers closing around the object. It was a small charm, a circle of braided horsehair with a tiny bead worked into it. Not a promise. Not exactly. More like a sign. A mark that said he had seen her, that he had placed her under something that mattered to him. He slipped away into the grass with his horse, a dark line in a darker sea, and she lost sight of him in 3 steps. The river whispered. The cottonwood groaned softly in the wind. The world seemed made only of those sounds and the quick drum of her heart. She did not know if the warrior would return, if the riders would pass, if dawn would come before trouble, found her. She opened her hand, and the little circle lay warm on her palm. The bead caught a bit of moonlight, and held it there like a promise too small to name. She tucked it into the hem of her sleeve and pressed her back to the roots, eyes on the darkness where he had gone. Somewhere beyond the river bend, a horse snorted. A voice hissed for quiet. A boot struck a stone. Then, slicing the hush clean in two, came the sharp cry of a bird startled into flight. She held her breath and waited for what would happen next, not knowing whether the night itself was with her, or counting down the moments until it turned against them both. The cry of the bird echoed and faded, but the silence that followed was even heavier. The outcast girl pressed her body deeper against the roots, her hand trembling where it touched the cold bark. She forced her breath to slow, the way the warrior had told her, but her ears strained for every sound. She could hear the river sliding past, could feel the faint pulse of the ground beneath her. But she could also sense the closeness of others. The riders he had warned her about, men who carried shadows in their voices and iron in their hands. Out in the tall grass, the Comanche warrior moved like part of the night itself. His horse was trained for silence, each step measured, each breath calm. He knew the riders ahead were not hunters of food, but hunters of opportunity. Men who came from the east or the south, who built fires too large and left trash behind, who carried the smell of greed more than hunger. He had seen their kind before. White traders who spoke false bargains, deserters who carried guns but no honor, scavengers who moved where law had no reach. He had tracked them for days with his people, watching them cut across lands that were not theirs, leaving fear in the villages they brushed against. Tonight, their trail had crossed his again, and fate had set the outcast girl in the middle of it. The riders had no idea she was near. They had no idea their every careless sound rolled straight to the ears of someone who lived by silence. The warrior crouched low on a ridge, watching faint figures by a fire too far for her to see. There were 4 of them, rough men with unshaven faces, their horses tied in a loose line. One of them carried a rifle slung across his back. Another kept a knife in his boot, its hilt glinting when he shifted. They spoke in hushed voices, but he caught enough to know their intent. They were planning to ride at dawn toward a small settlement upriver, a place where people would not be ready to fight. He felt his jaw tighten. His duty was clear. His people would need to know by morning. But between him and the camp was the bayou, girl hiding under the cottonwood, and if he left her, she might fall into the riders' path when they moved. If he stayed, he risked missing the chance to warn his people. The weight of both choices pressed on him like stone. Meanwhile, the girl clutched the charm he had given her, her thoughts running wild. She wondered if he would return, or if the night had already taken him. She wondered what kind of men crept so near that even the birds feared them. She thought of her own people and how quickly they had thrown her away, how easily they had called her cursed. These men out there, were they worse than the ones who had cast her out, or only a reflection of the same cruelty in another form? She did not know. What she did know was that she trusted the warrior in a way that surprised her, and that trust was the only thread keeping her from breaking apart in fear. Farther away, among the Comanche camp, other stories unfolded that would soon tie into theirs. The council was preparing for its meeting at dawn, men and women gathering around fires, speaking in low tones of trade, of raids, of the shifting winds that carried whispers of forts being built deeper into their lands. Some voices urged caution, others urged defiance. Among them, a young hunter, cousin to the warrior, sharpened his arrows and muttered that the world was changing too fast. He remembered when the land felt wide and endless. Now fences cut through grass and wagons rolled where herds once roamed. He worried that honor alone would not be enough to face what was coming. He did not yet know his cousin was out in the dark, standing at the edge of 2 worlds, caught between duty and the pull of something he could not name. The riders laughed softly by their fire, passing a flask between them. One spat into the dirt, another kicked at the logs to send sparks flying. They spoke of easy pickings, of the fear in settler eyes when guns were shown, of horses they would take by morning. Their cruelty was plain, the kind of cruelty born not of need but of wanting more than their share. The warrior's hands itched to end it then and there, but he knew better. 4 against 1, with the girl unprotected, rash action would only spill blood and solve nothing. He would need to think like the wind, patient and unseen, striking at the right moment. Back by the river, the girl shifted slightly, her muscles stiff from stillness. She thought she heard movement close by, a soft crunch in the grass no larger than a rabbit's tread. Her breath caught. She dared not look, afraid the sound might belong to more than an animal. The night pressed close around her, and she realized how small she was beneath the stars. Yet instead of despair, a strange calm filled her chest. She had lived through years of rejection, years of being less than nothing to those around her. Tonight, even if fear shook her bones, she felt seen. She felt that her words to the warrior had planted themselves in the soil of fate, and something was beginning to grow. The warrior turned from the ridge and slipped back toward her, his steps a whisper on the earth. When he reached the cottonwood, he crouched low. Her eyes widened with relief when she saw his silhouette against the moonlit river. He raised a hand to quiet her before she could speak. Leaning close, his voice was barely more than air. 4 men. They wait for dawn. They plan to ride north. She nodded, her lips pressing tight. What will you do? His gaze flicked over her face, searching for something. I must warn my people. But if I leave you, they may pass this way. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. I will stay hidden. I will not move until the sun is high. He studied her a long moment. He could see fear in her eyes. Yes, but also a kind of strength he did not expect. He gave a small nod. If trouble comes, run to the reeds. Follow the river. Do not look back. What about you? She whispered. He did not answer. Instead, he touched the small braid of horsehair at her wrist, pressing it once before standing. Then, as quiet as smoke, he melted back into the darkness, leaving her with the river's whisper and the weight of waiting. In the riders' camp, one of the men lifted his head suddenly, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. He thought he saw a shadow move, but when he blinked, it was gone. He cursed under his breath and reached for his rifle. His companions mocked him for being jumpy, but unease settled into their group. They had wandered far into land, they did not know, and the night seemed to watch them with unseen eyes. The girl curled tighter beneath the cottonwood roots, clutching the charm like a lifeline. She did not know that far off, in the Comanche camp, voices were already dividing, some calling for peace with the outsiders, others urging for war before the land was taken from them piece by piece. She did not know that her presence, her simple words to the warrior, would become tangled in a web larger than her own longing. All she knew was that somewhere in the night, men with cruelty in their voices drew nearer, and the only shield she had was the memory of the warrior's steady gaze. The river flowed on, patient and eternal, carrying secrets toward the dawn. The outcast girl closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a prayer not to any god she had been taught, but to the land itself, asking it to keep her safe until he returned. Whether the land would answer or not, she could not know. What she did know was that the night was far from over, and the storm that had begun between her, the warrior, and the riders was only just gathering its strength. The night throbbed with silence, broken only by the restless shuffle of horses and the crackle of a dying fire in the riders' camp. The Comanche warrior crouched low in the grass, every sense sharp, his hand resting against the earth to feel the smallest tremor. He could not shake the unease growing in his chest. 4 men, armed and reckless, so close to the girl hidden by the cottonwood, and still his people waited for his warning in the camp to the south. Duty pulled at him from two directions, and whichever way he turned, the risk sharpened. He breathed slow, forcing his heart steady, but his mind was a storm. The riders were growing restless. One of them, a heavy man with a scar cutting across his cheek, stood and stretched, his boots sinking deep into the soil. "Don't like this place," he muttered. "Too quiet." The others jeered, but their laughter was thin. Even men, who lived by cruelty, felt the weight of land that did not welcome them. Still they stayed. They had smelled weakness upriver, and weakness meant easy spoils. Dawn was their promise, but dawn was also a danger. For in daylight, the prairie carried voices farther, and what was hidden in shadow would no longer be concealed. By the riverbank, the girl pressed her ear against the roots, listening. She could hear faint pieces of their voices carried by the wind, and each word sent chills down her spine. Her body ached from stillness, but fear held her in place stronger than any chain. She thought of the warrior moving somewhere beyond her sight, and a part of her feared she might never see him again. Another part feared he would return at the wrong moment, and the riders would swallow him whole. She clutched the horsehair charm until the bead dug into her palm. The firelight from their camp flickered in her mind like a signal of danger, always too close, always waiting. The warrior shifted positions, circling wider, studying their camp from different angles. He knew he could not face 4 rifles head-on, not with the girl unguarded. But he also knew that the riders' greed made them careless. If he struck in the right way, at the right time, he could scatter them, drive them into the river's bend, give her the chance to slip free. But dawn was crawling closer. The horizon carried the faintest gray now, a reminder that time was thinning. He would have to act soon, or everything would collapse. In the distance, beyond their small struggle, the Comanche camp stirred. The council fire burned low as elders spoke of the riders' threat. Some voices urged to meet with force, others warned that open battle would draw more soldiers from the forts. The warrior's cousin, the young hunter, stood with his bow in hand, restless. He feared his cousin was already out there facing danger alone, and he worried that when the sun rose, news would arrive too late. The camp braced for decisions that would shape more than one life, not knowing that at that very hour, fate was being decided at the bend of the river. The rider's unease grew heavier. The man with the scar spat again, muttering about how he felt eyes on his back. Another pulled his rifle closer, his gaze sweeping the dark. The faint cry of a coyote cut the air, and all 4 men froze for a moment. Their laughter died completely, replaced with whispers too low to catch. Then, as if daring the night itself, one of them threw more wood onto the fire, sending sparks high. The blaze roared brighter, painting their faces in harsh orange. The warrior narrowed his eyes. They were making themselves visible, but they were also less cautious now. Firelight blinded men to the dark beyond. He sank lower, every muscle taut. The grass brushed his arms like water. He moved closer, close enough now to smell the smoke, close enough to see the gleam of their weapons. His heartbeat slowed, not with calm, but with focus. One chance, that was all he would have. By the cottonwood, the girl heard the sudden rise of flames and knew something was shifting. Her breath caught as she peeked between the roots, seeing the glow brighten against the horizon. She couldn't see the warrior, couldn't hear him, but the air itself seemed charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Fear pressed heavy, but so did a strange certainty that whatever happened next, it would change her life forever. The riders drank deeply, their voices louder now, careless, but every laugh and every boast carried the weight of cruelty waiting to be unleashed. They spoke of horses they would take, of goods they would plunder, of women they would scare into silence. Each word tightened the warrior's resolve. His people could not suffer more wounds. And she, this outcast girl who had spoken words as raw and honest as a wound, she could not be left to their mercy. The fire crackled louder, and the sky at the edge of the world began to pale. Dawn was almost here. The warrior's hands flexed. Against the hilt of his blade, his breath pulling slow through his teeth. He could hear his own blood in his ears. He thought of his people waiting, of the elders' counsel, of the duty to protect. He thought of the girl's voice, trembling yet certain, asking for nothing but a place where her heart could rest. 2 paths stretched before him, each dangerous, each impossible to turn away from. The girl shifted in her hiding place, her hand shaking, but her spirit fierce. She wanted to call out, to tell him she was not afraid, that she would not break if danger came. But the night smothered her voice, and she stayed silent, waiting, trusting that the storm gathering in the dark would break at last. Then, from the riders' camp, one of them lifted his head sharply, his gaze locked toward the cottonwood. "There," he hissed. "Thought I saw movement." The others grabbed their rifles, their boots grinding into the soil. The fire blazed at their backs, and their faces were sharp with suspicion. They began to move toward the river, steps heavy, shadows stretching long in the firelight. The girl's heart slammed against her ribs. She pressed herself tighter against the roots, every breath shallow. She wanted to vanish into the bark, into the earth, into the river itself. But footsteps drew closer, the grass parting under their boots, the glint of metal catching the last of the night. And still, unseen in the tall grass, the Comanche warrior waited, his body coiled like the bowstring before release. His eyes followed, their every move, and in his chest the choice sharpened into steel. He could strike now and reveal himself, or he could wait and risk her being discovered. Either way, the moment had come. The air thickened with tension, the river holding its breath, the dawn pressing against the horizon. The riders stepped closer. The girl clutched the charm in her hand, whispering a silent plea. The warrior's hand slid over his weapon, his jaw set. Everything hung by a single thread, stretched so tight it could snap with the next breath. The riders crept closer, their boots snapping twigs and their rifles held low but ready. The scarred man's voice was a whisper, rough and sharp. "Something's down there by the roots." The girl's chest tightened. She pressed herself, deeper into the hollow, clutching the charm so hard the bead cut into her skin. The firelight behind the men threw long shadows that reached toward her hiding place like dark fingers. For a moment, she thought the earth itself might betray her with the sound of her heartbeat. And then the grass moved. A shadow slid out of the dark with the silence of a wolf. The Comanche warrior rose from the tall grass in a rush, the gleam of his blade catching the faint edge of dawn. His horse followed at his side, a sudden burst of strength and sound that tore through the quiet. The men shouted, stumbling back in surprise. Before they could level their rifles, the warrior was among them. His strike was fast, his movements sharp and certain, honed by years of survival. The first man dropped his rifle when the warrior's horse reared, its hooves striking the ground inches from his chest. The second swung his weapon wildly, but the warrior deflected it with a blow that knocked the man to his knees. The camp erupted in chaos, firelight twisting over bodies and weapons, the air alive with shouting. The girl peeked out from the roots, eyes wide, fear and awe crashing together. She had seen men fight before, angry, drunken brawls, pitiful struggles, in the dust, but never this. The warrior moved with purpose, each strike calculated, each step chosen as if the land itself guided him. He was not reckless. He was a storm moving with intent, pushing the riders back toward the river bend. The scarred man roared and raised his rifle. For a heartbeat, the girl froze, watching the barrel swing toward the warrior. Without thinking, she leapt from her hiding place. "Behind you!" she cried, her voice sharp enough to cut through the clash. The warrior spun at her warning just as the rifle fired. The bullet tore through air, grazing his shoulder but missing its mark. Pain seared across his arm. But he did not falter. He lunged, knocking the rifle from the man's grasp, sending it spinning into the river's edge. The riders, stunned and wounded, realized the balance had shifted. One staggered to his feet and scrambled for his horse, panic in every motion. Another tried to grab his fallen knife, but the warrior's blade pressed cold against his throat before he could lift it. The last man, seeing his companions broken and scattered, dropped his weapon altogether, hands trembling in surrender. The warrior stood tall, breath heavy, blood soaking through the fabric at his shoulder. His gaze swept over them, fierce and unrelenting. "Leave," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of thunder. "Take your fire, take your greed, and do not come back to this land." The men did not argue. They scrambled for their horses, muttering curses, fear plain, in their eyes. Within moments, they were gone, their shapes shrinking against the pale line of dawn. The fire they left behind sputtered and cracked, its glow already dimming. The girl ran to him, her hands shaking as she reached for his wounded arm. "You're hurt." "It is nothing," he said, though his face tightened from the pain. "Your voice saved me." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You would have done the same." He looked at her then, really looked, and in his gaze was something beyond gratitude. It was recognition, as if the thread that had drawn them together had finally revealed itself. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his fingers warm despite the blood. "You are no outcast here," he said softly. "Not to me." For the first time in years, she felt the weight on her chest lift. All the whispers, all the rejection, all the nights of silence, none of it mattered now. What mattered was the truth in his eyes, the promise she had longed for, but never thought she would find. She pressed her forehead against his arm, her voice breaking with quiet relief. "Then I am not alone anymore." The warrior steadied himself, pulling his strength back into place. The sun crested the horizon, spilling light across the river and the plains, washing the night's fear away. He knew he had to return to his people soon, to tell of the riders, to face the council and whatever judgment they would bring. But he also knew he could not turn away from her now. Her courage had bound her to him in ways no counsel could unmake. They walked together toward the river bend, the morning light glinting on the water. His wound slowed him, but she stayed at his side, supporting him when his steps faltered. The reeds bent in the breeze, their whispers soft and steady, as if the land itself was welcoming the bond they had forged. When they reached the open plain, the Comanche camp lay in the distance, smoke from the council fire rising into the sky. The girl hesitated, fear tugging at her heart again. "Will they accept me?" she asked quietly. He paused, his dark eyes steady on hers. "They will see that you stood with me when danger came. They will see that you carry truth in your heart. And if they do not?" He took her hand, closing her fingers around his own. "Then I will stand with you, as you stood with me." The words sank deep, more powerful than any oath she had ever heard. Together they began the walk toward the camp, each step heavy with what waited ahead, but also lighter than the lives they had left behind. The young hunter saw them first. His cousin, bloodied but unbroken, the strange girl beside him with her chin held high. He shouted to the others, and soon the council gathered, voices rising with questions and murmurs. Some frowned at the sight of her, suspicious, wary. Others saw the wound on the warrior's shoulder, the fire in his eyes, and fell silent, waiting. He told the council of the riders, of their plans to raid the settlement, of how he had driven them off. He did not speak of the girl's fear, but of her courage, of how her warning had saved him. He placed the truth before them, plain and unadorned. When he finished, the council was quiet. The elders exchanged long glances, weighing the balance of tradition and honor. Finally, one elder spoke. "The land brings us what we need, even if we do not understand it. A woman who speaks truth at the edge of death is no curse. She is a gift. The murmur of voices shifted, no longer sharp, but thoughtful. The young hunter smiled, pride clear in his eyes. The girl bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from sorrow, but from the release of years of rejection. For the first time, she felt not only seen but welcomed. The warrior squeezed her hand once more, quiet and steady. She lifted her face to him, her voice soft but strong. You were the first man in my bed of fear, the first to stand with me, and the only one I will love. He did not answer with words. He only held her gaze, and in that gaze was everything. Respect, loyalty, and the promise of a future they would build together, no matter how uncertain the world became. As the sun climbed higher, the council fire burned steady, and the river carried the night's secrets away. The outcast girl was outcast no more. The Comanche warrior had found not just another duty, but a bond that made his own heart stronger.
Together, they had turned fear into belonging, silence into truth. And as they stood side by side with the land stretching wide and endless around them, the story closed not with despair, but with hope. The kind of hope that roots itself deep
in the earth and grows tall against the sky, unshaken by storms, unbroken by time.